Welcome to TradeTheNBA.com. This is John. This report is for the 20th of August, and that push rising three methods here in relation to this drop from a candlestick perspective, coming off of just basically higher red DOC, just a subtle increase and continuation of buyers within the midterm buyers still being above it, and we had a slight reset of steel buyers going up, but they've kind of now made a new peak. So the question is, on their fade back down, are we going to see short activation, which would result in a little bit of pullback? Coincidentally, we got hit right at that level I was talking about, right around this 29, 23-ish range. So we'll see if we can get the close above that. It's also, well, right up against the 61% line right there at 32. So those become the threshold points, and of course then there's the 50 at 29.02, which is right next to that 29.05 that we've had for a while. Below that, you know, you can be short, and even if it moves above the 61 and then comes back below, likewise situation, because now we have cyan rising. We don't have steel crossing below cyan yet. That would be the final crossover move, as well as seeing green dip below red. And even a rollover red. We're only at negative 7.5, so certainly if the rally is going to continue, there's plenty of room for it to take place. But a rollover on our red DOC at this particular point would just point back to just a return to the 23% range. So that's really what we're eyeing at the most part right now, is are we going to get into overbought situations where we start seeing positive extremes, which we noticed already developed on the NASDAQ yesterday, which means that low of 76.16 is going to be revisited, and potentially that is going to be, you know, the start of a little bit of softening. And it's not a coincidence that we're hitting right up against that previous resistance zone. What's likely to happen though is this is going to be just a slow dip down. This will be the low, so we'll be able to match that trend line going forward. And because it's rather subtle, in fact, if I even draw it, you can see it. If we just go, I would go off the low main body, but you can see it's a subtle arc. So even if you came back and just, you know, tiptoed across it, you would make a fine move across. Now, if you went with the lower, it's even a smaller adjustment, which gives an even bigger range coming back down. So the potentials from a trend line standpoint that people will be watching, those are them. I don't think it's as significant as some people might refer to, because at the end of the day, this is really about forward direction of the economy and whether or not the doom and gloomers are right, or whether or not the status quo will continue, or we'll actually see a boost. Of course, the world seems to be struggling a bit, and there's been some concern that with the tariffs that have been initiated, that prices are rising a little bit. We're seeing that a little bit in the effect of this drop out of the euro, because the Brit exit thing is becoming even more scary. So we're getting into that really interesting point that I've talked about. As we get close to this 110, everything sort of hits the fan, and that could cause dramatic changes. Wouldn't hurt the euro for them to reach towards parity. They could use the boost in the economy. Germany's already suffering in that as well. So they need some changes to stimulate things, and certainly from a U.S. standpoint, making their goods more expensive isn't going to help the fact that you've already got tariffs on some things. So it's compounded, but there's always going to be pain when you're doing these kind of trade negotiations and trying to level out that playing field. Oil, from its standpoint, again, just fine. It's right in line with our expectations. Also not indicating recessionary pressures of any kind at this particular point. So that's kind of counter to what, you know, you're hearing on the news. So always be cautious about listening to talking heads, because they need doom and gloom to be, you know, creating excitement. Gold, all we've done is just filled right back into this little island top is what you would call that one. So that's kind of an exciting one. We just developed DOC spread right there, but with no steel coming from above to below, this is still just going to be a short-term opportunity to see a turnaround and shakeout for the next leg up. and there was nothing to talk about from a 5K standpoint because we started up, continued up. Once we got to that 23, we hit the resistance, just came back a little bit to the 50%, went right back to the highs, and then dipped right back to equivalently the same 50% right there, and are still battling right around that 23 spot again. So all in all, I think everything's pretty much going right according to plan. The 50K is still in that big trade from right over here. In fact, we can take a look at that one. It's most likely going to produce new equity highs. The equity was 43, and we're at 25 plus another 40 potentially. So, yeah, that would definitely put it all-time equity high. But it's following it correctly based on what transition we would have seen. We didn't care for this one as much because we had the falling magenta lines in that, and it was within a non-reset right there. We ended up getting the crossover where you then ended up with green moving above. That happens a little bit later than where it registered the orange dip below the green, with the green having crossed over at the same time that you have steel crossover. It was all took place right about there, so bought the next bar at the open, and then subsequently one more time because of the continued rising steel and red DOC. So felt comfortable with that, and that's really pretty much what it's ridden the whole way through. And now we're sort of at pretty extreme levels, which means we're going to see some retraces within this. The question will be, will they violate the 2905 range, which is currently here at the 61 on the 50K. So that's going to be what we'll be looking at this particular point. This all still is very healthy. Of course, when we move below the negative 13.5, I think you're likely to see a little bit more dips, but as long as it stays without having reset above red, I think that the uptrend continues. So there you have it, long and the short of it, mostly long. As always, if I'll put anything up that's relevant on the Skype chat. Trade well.